FPL Game Week 5, the best players to buy. More clean sheets this year than we've had over the past couple of seasons. Should you just be buying defenders, or actually are there some attackers that we should be replacing some of those players who are blanking in almost every single game week so far? If you've got the likes of Verts, if you've got the likes of Ollie Watkins, should you be selling them? And who are the best replacements for all of those players across defenders, midfielders and forwards? What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Thank you for the support on the channel, and subscribe if you are new around here as well. We're going to dive in. It's the longest video that we do every week, so it's probably going to cover a lot of the detail that you want. But actually, what's quite interesting is I'm going to start off a transfer targets video by saying there's going to be a lot of you thinking about rolling a transfer this week, and here's why I do think it's a good idea and why I actually think I am likely to roll my transfer this week. So a lot of that revolves around the three big teams we feel like we've got in terms of FPL transfers over this week and over the next couple of weeks in Liverpool, Manchester City and Arsenal. Game week 5 is the final good game that Liverpool have for their start of the season fixture run. They then go into Palace away, Chelsea United, Brentford, Villa, Manchester City. Some of those games are still good if you wanted to hold on to a Mo Salah or a Gakpo, a Virgil van Dijk. There's absolutely no priority to sell them all, but it's not quite as easy as we've seen in some of the first few games. Whereas actually Arsenal and Manchester City are sort of entering the last games of their difficult start to the season before Arsenal start a good run of fixtures from game week 7 onwards, and Manchester City start a good run of fixtures from game week 6 onwards. And of course, Manchester City play Arsenal in game week 5. That is a fixture that is very difficult to call this week. There'll be some of you in the comments who definitely think City will win. Some of you think that Arsenal at home will have enough defensively to get over the line in that fixture. And I think it just highlights that buying someone like an Erling Haaland or a Gyökeres this week, or an Arsenal defender or a City defender, is quite difficult to do. But having a couple of transfers, if you want to pivot away from Salah into an Erling Haaland, having enough transfers to buy an Arsenal player in game week 7 is probably a sensible thing to do. There are not loads of transfers with players also in form that I think we can really target going into game week 5 that is a good use of a transfer. So if you're undecided on players to buy, I do think this is probably a good week to roll, but we will cover some players right now that you could buy if you are looking to make some moves. So we're going to cover off the fixtures for the next 6 game weeks. So from game week 5 until game week 10, we actually have Wolves right at the top, which with someone with Agbadu in their team, is a little bit difficult to know what to do with them. If you've got Strand Larsen, it does sound like he is going to be out for a fair few weeks, so I would look to sell. And generally, Wolves and Leeds at the top is probably not time to buy because they are not performing well enough. You've also got Spurs and Nottingham Forest quite high up, but a general sort of observation is most of you are already invested in those teams. So again, this is why this week it's quite difficult to find players that you really want to buy, because the teams with the best fixtures over the next few weeks are either not performing well, or they're already the teams that we've already got investment in. You've also then got quite high up there Brighton, but they've actually got Spurs and Chelsea in the next 2, and their fixtures get good from game week 7. Arsenal high up there, and you've also got Sunderland and Aston Villa and West Ham. Teams that are not performing well or have difficult fixtures this week. Again, highlighting it is actually quite difficult to know where to make transfers this week unless you're just buying a player that you like. For example, Semenyo. Bournemouth are quite low down on this list because they do have Fulham, they've got Palace away, Forest and City in there, which are not the most easy run of fixtures, plus Newcastle. But Semenyo is performing really well. So if you're looking to make transfers this week, it's more based off players that you know you want in your team for the long term, maybe rather than the fixtures that you've got. Also low down the list, we do have Manchester United. You've got Burnley, Fulham, Newcastle, and actually Crystal Palace. The next run of fixtures for Palace are not that great, but they have a really nice fixture against West Ham this week. So if you've got them, they look like a great option, particularly from set pieces. We are seeing West Ham concede a lot of chances. So if you've got a Chris Richards, a Lacroix, a Mark Gay, this could be a great option for you. But again, it's difficult to pick teams with great fixtures that we really want to buy from at the moment. And then we're having a look at the best and worst defenses in the league so far this season. Not long now until we have 6 game weeks worth of data and we can turn this table back to what it is for the majority of this season. But again, what we're looking at is XG per 90 so far this season and comparing it to the totals that they have of last year. But really what's interesting is that middle column on both sides. The best attacks in terms of XG per 90 and XGC per 90. I am going to exclude penalties from this, I think, going forward, just because Man United, the second best attack in the league, because they've had 2 penalties so far this season, 1 scored and 1 missed. I think non-penalty data is going to be slightly more relevant, I think, as a change. So let me know if you think that's a benefit or whether you think penalties are part of the game, so they should be included in the data nonetheless. Aston Villa and Wolves scoring very badly in terms of their attack, and Aston Villa and Wolves, two teams scoring very badly in terms of their defence as well. When you look at the attacks that we've got, Manchester City, Man United, Chelsea, Brighton, Arsenal, and actually Everton doing very well. So the likes of Illiman and Dye, the likes of Erling Haaland, Reinders, Palmer, João Pedro, and Arsenal about to come to the front, very much a focal point. And Arsenal do very well in terms of their defence. That is why, with a lot of the players that we're maybe looking to buy having difficult fixtures this week, but actually doing very well in terms of the data, you can either buy them this week with a difficult fixture, or you can look to buy them in game week 6 when things start to look a little bit better. Now, this video is being sponsored by Fantasy Football Scout. You can get it with the link in the description. You can check out the members area. But what I want to use it for very quickly is just to talk about the over and underperformers that we're seeing in the data so far this season. In terms of goals scored, Spurs are the biggest overperformers in terms of goals. They have 8 goals from 4.91 expected goals. So they've been quite fortunate with the chances they're scoring, along with Liverpool and Arsenal, massively overperforming almost all of them by at least 2.5 more goals than we're expecting to see. In terms of underperformers, Man United and Aston Villa, 4 goals for United. They should have, in theory, based on the data, scored 8 goals. Now, they did have a missed penalty in there, but still outside of that. And Aston Villa. Now, they've actually only created 3 XG so far this season, which is alarming, but they failed to score at all, which is a big underperformance. In terms of expected goals conceded, West Ham have been, in theory, a little bit unlucky. 11 conceded from 5.52 expected goals conceded, but that's what happens when you fail to defend set pieces the way that they have. And in terms of overperformers, Spurs, 1 goal conceded despite conceding almost 5 XGC. So if you've got the likes of Van de Ven, Romero, Porro, you've probably been a bit lucky to get the clean sheets that they have. Aston Villa also a little bit up there. They've been even more lucky in terms of defence than maybe they should have been. 4 goals conceded from almost 8 expected goals conceded. What is going on at Aston Villa? To go back and have a look at some players to buy, so starting off in defence, so we just saw that Bournemouth's data has been not bad, and actually we're probably expecting them to improve because they've been a little bit unlucky. I really like Senesi, one of the few defenders who has hit DEFCON in every single game. He is averaging the most DEFCON per 90 of all of the players that we've got. He scored 7 points per 90. The attacking data is all right. Bournemouth's defensive data is pretty good, and he is nice and cheap. He is going to be a mainstay in all of our teams for the majority of the season, I think. So nice to get him nice and cheap. Gabriel is next and Gvardiol is the one after. The issue with them is they have really nice long-term fixtures, but they play against each other this week. Again, hinting that it might be a good week to look to potentially roll a transfer. If you need to buy a defender this week specifically, Van Dijk, Lacroix, Munoz, the Crystal Palace options with West Ham this week, Everton for Virgil van Dijk is one you can have a look at. You could also have a look at Livramento, but do bear in mind that Newcastle played Champions League football on Thursday evening against Barcelona before a quick turnaround against Bournemouth in the Premier League, a team who will leave no prisoners if Newcastle are not fully ready for that game. Tarkowski, similar. I really like his DEFCON is fantastic. Again, with Senesi, one of 2 defenders to hit FPL DEFCON every game, but it is Liverpool away for them. In terms of cheaper ones, I still like Joachim Andersen. Him and Senesi, both really, really good options. And he has Brentford at home this week. I quite like that. And Van de Ven. Now, we just saw that Spurs have outperformed their defensive data, but he seems to be getting amongst the goals as well. The fixtures remain pretty good for the short term at a cheap price. Of course, the 4.5 options you could look at here that aren't here are the Crystal Palace options, but I probably prefer one of the more expensive players from their team. Now looking in terms of midfielders, if you need a midfielder, it has to be Semenyo. The price is just going to go up and up. He's risen by 0.5 so far this season. And actually, when you look at the long-term fixtures, you can pick out certain short-term bursts, particularly between about game week 9 and game week 12, where the fixtures are not quite as good. But between now and about Christmas, you're going to play Semenyo in pretty much every single fixture. So if you have the money to go and buy him, I would do that. Next up is Cole Palmer and Enzo Fernandez. Again, the Chelsea fixtures between now and about game week 12 rank as some of the best they have. If you can't afford Cole Palmer, who I do expect to come back into the lineup now, you could look at Enzo Fernandez. You could also look at Caicedo, who's actually number 10 in here, because I probably prefer the others and are going to be better for attacking outputs. But I have been thinking a lot this week about Caicedo. He is hitting DEFCON in 75% of fixtures as a midfielder. He has scored twice so far this season, which makes his attacking output look better than it will probably be. But if I just knew that every week Caicedo will get 4 points as a base, And then if he gets any attacking returns on top of that, he's just going to be a good option. And if you're wildcarding early and are not going to wildcard for a long time, he could just be a nice option for the long term that you don't really have to worry about. He is definitely one on radar if I look to play my wildcard in game week 6. It's just if it blocks triple Chelsea instead. Xavi Simons, I was quite impressed with. He's going to play a lot of minutes central, we think. Took a lot of the set pieces in that game. A nice run of fixtures, and I definitely prefer him over Kudus of Spurs. Then it's the Everton guys. I like Dewsbury Hall, but I've gone with Ilman and Dyer here and Grealish. The issue is it's Liverpool this week, but I like them from game week 6 onwards when they do play West Ham. Reinders, again, it's Arsenal this week, but long term, he's a really nice option at his price. It is just the fixture this week, but from game week 6 onwards, great, and absolutely should have had some returns if he could finish in that Manchester derby in game week 4. Matoma I quite like. The fixtures are quite mixed, but his minutes look much better than we've seen in the past at that Brighton team. If he can keep his place and continue playing as he is, the returns are surely going to be there. And I know West Ham have been bad, but I have gone with Lucas Paqueta. The fixtures long term are not bad until game week 12. If that's when you're looking to wildcard, the DEFCON still feels pretty good, and he might play some minutes up front if Fulkrog is out for a while. And now we're moving up front, and to be honest, there aren't that many forwards to buy at the moment, which is why Strand Larsen, who's injured, is actually on this list. I don't expect Strand Larsen to be back available, but if he is miraculously available for game week 5, he suddenly becomes a fantastic option. So I did want to talk about him. Leeds, Sunderland, Burnley in the next 5. Plus, he's their main talisman, and Wolves look like they massively miss him. I don't think he's going to be back, but if he is, he's got to be one to consider as the best cheap forward. Haaland, João Pedro, Gyökeres is going to become very template very quickly. Pretty much anyone who wildcards in game week 6, which looks like it's going to be very popular, is going to go with that front line, I think. A couple of people might look to downgrade one of them in order to go for a slightly cheaper option to spread the money if they want Palmer or something like that. But I would imagine that Haaland, João Pedro, Gyökeres is just going to be the most popular. Haaland is probably the best to buy long term, but he does have Arsenal this week. João Pedro may be better against Man United this week. And Gyökeres, again, plays Manchester City. But if you're looking to buy a forward, I wouldn't try and buy someone else short term when these are the best 3 long term. Outside of that, Evan Nilsson, the fact that it looks like Semenyo's is on penalties does dampen his appeal a little bit. Mateta, it sounds like he is going to start in the cup for Crystal Palace midweek, which isn't great. They did lose a little bit of creativity without Sarr and Adam Wharton there. And I'm just not as certain how much I love the upcoming fixtures for them now that that Sunderland game is out of the way. Voltemada, the minutes are a little bit up in the air. He came back and he's played 65 in his first appearance. The upcoming fixtures are all right, but I do just prefer more proven, reliable options above him despite that goal this week. And in terms of cheaper ones, Thiago at Brentford is playing 90 pretty much every game. He's probably on penalties, although he doesn't look that much of a goal threat. Muniz at Fulham looks like more of a goal threat, but his minutes are slightly less secure and the fixtures are not great. And Lyle Foster, starting up front for Burnley, looks pretty secure. Broja could come in, but Foster's physicality, he's 5 million if you needed a cheaper one, but I would not expect much from them and the fixtures don't look great. Really only 4 or 5 strikers I really think are worth going for at the moment. To have a look at some of your popular transfers now after we've looked at some of the best players to buy, some of you are considering moving off Reinders to go for someone like a Caicedo, and although on wildcard you could consider it, but I think the game week 6 to 8 fixtures for Manchester City would mean I wouldn't do this. Now, also at Manchester City, some of you are looking to sell Aït-Nouri. He is injured and likely out for at least 5 weeks, but Van de Ven probably wouldn't be my replacement. He's looked good, but they have massively overperformed in terms of their defensive data. I'd probably look elsewhere, one of those defenders that we spoke about, like a Gabriel, like a Munoz, like a Lacroix, like a Senesi, like a Virgil van Dijk or a Gvardiol you could look at. Into midfield, Wirtz to Semenyo. If you're going to wildcard in game week 6, I'm not sure it's worth a transfer just for 1 week, although I can't put you off doing it if you want to do it. If you're not going to wildcard for a while, I would get this done, yes. Kudus is being sold to people like Jack Grealish. Not really for me with the fixture, although Kudus has not looked great in terms of attacking goal threat. I'm not sure I would do this transfer this week. If you wanted to go Kudus to Xavi Simons as well, it feels a bit sideways. So if you've gone with Kudus, I would just give him the fixtures that you've bought him for. And the final one is selling Ollie Watkins. And this is going to sound crazy, but I would not sell Ollie Watkins for either Gyökeres or Erling Haaland this week. The Manchester City versus Arsenal game is too difficult to call in terms of chances with Watkins playing Sunderland. If you told me you did it to buy Haaland, I don't have a massive problem with it. but I do think I would just give Watkins one more week and look to do the move for Burnley at home. And then when the Arsenal fixtures start to look a little bit better. João Pedro is a little bit different because United have looked pretty poor defensively. So if you wanted to downgrade Watkins to João Pedro, I probably would. But let's see how I'm recording before Aston Villa play on Tuesday evening. Maybe they learn how to score a goal in that game and it doesn't look quite as bad. Now, we're going to talk briefly through a wildcard draft for Game Week 5. And before we get into it, I don't like wildcarding this week. And it's the same reason that I advise rolling the transfer throughout most of this video, is that a lot of the players you want to buy on wildcard don't actually have the best fixture this week. And I think this is a very similar wildcard to what you'd wildcard in Game Week 6. And I wouldn't completely rip up a Game Week 5 wildcard just to pick players who might have a better fixture this week that wouldn't be included in a wildcard if you played it next week. So realistically, what you need to do if you do want a wildcard this week is basically pick the team that you'd want if you wildcarded in Game Week 6 and play it this week and just go a week early if you're fed up with the likes of your Aston Villa players or a few other players like a Bruno that you want to sell. So I've gone with Sanchez and I've gone with Dubravka. You could also look at David Raya in goal or Vicario. Into defence, I've gone with Gabriel, I've gone with Lacroix, and I've gone with Anderson with Senesi and Tarkowski on the bench. You could play Senesi over Gabriel based on the fixture, but I think I would just opt for playing Gabriel every week. In my motto, if you own Gabriel, you play him every single week. Into midfield, so there is no Mo Salah, but because of the fixture, I have opted to keep Gakpo. I do think Gakpo's minutes look the most secure out of all those midfielders at the moment. And then I've gone with Semenyo, obviously. I've gone with Xavi Simons, and I've gone with Ilman and Dye and Reinders, and you've basically got to pick one of these two to play this week. If you wanted to go with Caicedo over one of these two, you could and start them against Man United, and then it's the obvious one up front in João Pedro, Haaland and Gyökeres. The other issue with the wildcard this week is the captaincy. It's really difficult to pick a captain with this wildcard draft, whereas from Game Week 6 onwards, captaincy looks really straightforward. So as another little word of caution, if you can wait to wildcard in Game Week 6, I would, because either you wildcard with a team this week that looks good, but then you're behind the people who are going to wildcard in Game Week 6, or you wildcard with a team this week that doesn't look that great like this one, and then you're set up quite well from Game Week 6 onwards. So I don't think it's a great week to do it, but if you want to, this is kind of what the draft would look like. So then just to wrap up and go through some of the games, Liverpool-Everton, I think this is a no buy, no sell situation unless you wanted to sell Vert. If you've got your Liverpool players, it's the end of their nice fixture run, so I would hold them. It is the early kickoff, and then you can look to buy from next week. Similarly for Everton, then you can look to sell from Game Week 6. Everton, again, their fixtures from Game Week 6 are not bad, but you're probably not buying them this week. Brighton, Spurs, the upcoming fixtures are all right for both of them. Spurs have massively overperformed. It feels like you're already invested in Spurs and you're probably not buying new, and I'm not sure I'd go too much into Brighton unless it's a midfielder. If you do have a Burnley or a Forest option, you can play them. I think this fixture is quite difficult to call. It's unlikely that any of us are looking to buy new into either of these teams. If you're looking at Crystal Palace, they are the ones to look at over West Ham this week. They have been very poor defensively, West Ham, from set pieces, so I do expect their centre-backs to do quite well, potentially a goal coming from that for Crystal Palace, but they did lack creativity without Sarr and Waterman in the team. Wolves versus Leeds, probably the two biggest underperformers so far this season. This could easily be a 0-0, but I'm not sure either of them want to keep a clean sheet. So maybe 1-1 is most likely. No buying any of the players from either of these teams. Manchester United versus Chelsea. Now, Chelsea play in the Champions League midweek away at Bayern Munich, so there might be a little bit of fatigue there. But Manchester United were pretty awful in the game against Manchester City. Definitely don't buy Man United players new. And if you want to buy a Chelsea player, you can for the long run. Brighton at home in Game Week 6, they have a pretty good record against. Fulham, Brentford. Brentford have actually been not bad. Quite impressed by Kevin Schade, but he's a little bit too expensive. The fixtures don't remain very good for a while. Fulham, if you want to dip into Anderson outside of that, I don't love any of the options, and there's a lot of rotation in the forward lines. Bournemouth, I like them, and actually I think this fixture benefits them more than I'd look to buy Newcastle, because Newcastle play Barcelona in the Champions League on Thursday, so Bournemouth options in the likes of Evan Nilsson, Semenyo and Senesi I really like. Sunderland, Aston Villa, an incredibly difficult game to call. I personally wouldn't be selling your Aston Villa players before this, but if you told me you have, I wouldn't have a real problem with that because they've been so disappointing. Sunderland have actually been pretty good at home, but again, I would probably still back Aston Villa to win this game. And then it's Arsenal City, the two teams that we want to buy going forward, but I wouldn't advise buying them this week because this fixture can go either way. Let me know your score predictions for Arsenal, Manchester City in the comments. Interested to know which way you think it will go. So as I said at the beginning, there are some players you can look to buy if you just like them long term. But if you're wildcarding in game week 6, you're a little bit uncertain of who to buy. It is a really good week to roll your transfer if you can. That is my current plan. I am dwindling a little bit on whether I think my bench boost is worth it. We'll discuss all of that in my Thursday morning team selection. Thank you all for watching. Any questions you have that aren't answered in this video, please drop them all in the comment section down below. 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll be back again very soon.